Welcome back to the Fundraising Beyond Borders podcast. I am so excited today to have Sandy Rees, founder of Get Fully Funded, and she has been a huge mentor in my fundraising life and pretty much where I have learned all my fundraising skills. So I'm really excited to have her on. Sandy, thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So we are going to dive into so many different key messaging, core numbers, campaigns, some really great things for international donors and or international nonprofits to basically find new donors, structure appeals. But Sandy, I would first love to know a little bit about your fundraising journey because, you know, we all have some fun stories to share. How did you get into fundraising? Did you always know you wanted to be a fundraiser? Share a little bit about that journey with us.
Well, I think like a lot of other people, I did not grow up thinking, I want to be a fundraiser. I fell into it. And I think that's how it happens for a lot of us. I was doing marketing for a staffing company in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I had a chance to go for a tour at the local rescue mission where I had been supporting financially and with, you know, food drive donations, things like that. And I got in there, and me being me, I asked 100 questions. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call and they say, hey, do you want to join our board? Because isn't that what we do? We get people with a pulse who had the least little bit of interest and are like, join our board. Well, I didn't have a clue what that meant. So I said yes. And I was in over my head very, very quickly. Everybody on that board, it was a big board. There were like 40, 45 people on that board. They were all much, much older than me. And most of them were men. And I was very clear why I was there because I was very different from everybody else, which was fine. And about a year later, they had a job that came open in their resource development office. And I looked at it and said, I could do that. That looks like marketing. So I talked to the president. He and I agreed I had the skill set. So I quit my job, resigned from the board. I took that job and I've never looked back.
Wow.
I love fundraising. It just clicks for me. It makes sense. I love connecting people to causes that they care about to make good things happen in the world. It just makes me super happy. I love doing it.
That's great. And Sandy, I know a lot of people tuning in are newer fundraisers. So they're just getting started or they've just started their own nonprofit. So what are some of those, when you first started to dive into fundraising, what were some of those key learnings as a new fundraiser that kind of really stuck with you and kind of maybe even still practice to this date?
So I'm going to show my age here because back when I started nonprofit work, when I was a new fundraiser, the internet was very young. You could not find fundraising information online. That did not happen. There were very, very few books written and available about fundraising. There were very few workshops. So I pretty much relied on my intuition and my own ideas. Now, thankfully, I'm the kind of person that I said, well, let's try this. Let's try that. And some things worked, some things didn't. What I figured out really quickly was a lot around storytelling. Yeah. That if I could connect through words, whether that was words on a page or spoken words at a speaking gig or something like that, people tended to lean in and they wanted to know more and they would give. So that was a huge piece of learning early on of, if I can find a way to tug heartstrings, people give. This is fun. Let's try this. Let's try that. So I was not afraid to test. And I did fail a lot. There were a lot of things that worked. There were a lot of things that did not work. And I did not take the failures personally. I just said, okay, interesting. Let me move on and let me try something else. And honestly, it probably took me about 18 months of testing and throwing spaghetti at the wall before I finally started to get a good handle on what I wanted to do during the year. And I think about fundraising in terms of a year, and especially on a calendar. What are the things that work every year in the spring? What works every year in the fall? Because when you can figure that out, it's a whole lot of rinse and repeat, and you're not making up something new every year. You don't need to. Right. So I started to learn what worked, and I started to build out my calendar. And somewhere around that 18-month, 2-year mark, I was really starting to pick up speed, and it was fun. It was so much fun when I had a couple of years worth of numbers of, let's say, direct mail and how my donors were going to respond. And I could predict then how the next piece was going to go based on those couple of years of historical numbers. And I'll
Right.
never forget, I had a CFO of a huge oil company that was on my board. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, do you have like a magic 8-ball or a crystal ball? Like, how do you know what these numbers are going to be? And I showed him and he said, that's awesome. So that makes so much sense just to look at your historical data and use that to project forward. So that's what I did. Now, I know that for those who are listening who have brand new organizations, you don't have any data. You're just you're kind of where I was in the beginning. You're just trying things to see what's going to work, what doesn't work. And you just trust your gut and you move on. And once you do get to that point where you have a year or two of data, then it's easier to tell for sure what's working, what's not working.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's huge, especially for international nonprofits too, is not being afraid to try, listening, right? Listening into kind of what are some of those trends that are going on. And then you mentioned a key thing as well, which is storytelling, like the power of storytelling and making sure we are honing in on that storytelling and being effective with that storytelling. And I want to get to that in a second, but one of the things that I have loved working with Sandy on, I think is going to really help international nonprofits. It kind of is that build up to storytelling is what Sandy calls a core number. And it has just pretty much changed how I fundraise in regards to like my messaging and how we're going to storytell with being what is your overall goal and mission as a nonprofit. So can you kind of let's backtrack and just share what is a core number? Because a lot of people, that's really a Sandy Rees thing. Yeah, fully funded thing. So can you kind of share to us what is a core number?
I will. So core number is a representation of what it costs to deliver a unit of service. So to explain this, let me back up and talk about when I was working at the food bank. I spent 5 years at Second Harvest Food Bank, and that's where I learned an awful lot of what I teach now. Like those things have not changed. The basics of fundraising do not change. It is based on relationships. Storytelling is key. Having a plan supports you. Like none of that changes. Here's what I figured out. I was working on monthly giving. I was building a monthly giving program. And I noticed that when I just said, hey, give $25 a month, people might give, they might not. Well, we started figuring out how much food does it take to provide a meal? Because we measured everything in pounds. And then I was able to figure out, well, like, what does it cost us to move a pound of food, to like receive it, store it, get it back out to the food pantries? So I'm just doing the math. And I kind of found my way into core number that way. And then when I could say 81 cents provides a day's worth of food to a person in need, and I used that, it exploded. Right. So it was basically 27 cents provides a meal for the food. 27 cents. That was hot. That's an easy yes. So first of all, people would say, how do you do that? Great. Now that gave me an opportunity to explain how the food bank worked and how it was massive quantities of donated food, not just, a bag of cans, but it was tractor trailer loads of name it, canned goods and cereal and all things. So it was just let me back into that. And of course, me being me, I'm curious. And I was doing the math. I'm like, 27 cents. That's awesome. Well, now I can do multiples of that. I can do $2.70. I can do $27. I can do $270. So then it became an issue of people not saying, yes, I'm going to give or no, I'm not going to give, but they were shopping. They were deciding, am I doing $2.70 or $27 or whatever? And I used that over and over and over and over, and my fundraising results skyrocketed. And then when I became a consultant, I started teaching other people how I did that. So just to give all the listeners sort of an overview of how this works, it's what it costs you to deliver a unit of service, basically, is what it is. Now, how you calculate that is you look at a year's worth of numbers, and you can do this on a calendar year if that's easier, or you can look at the last 12 months, whichever you want to do, and you look at all your costs, so total costs, not just direct costs, but every single penny you spent in your nonprofit. It all gets counted.
Which I think is so important, Sandy, to listeners think about that. It's not just a project fee or a program fee. It's everything included. So including your overhead costs.
Yes, every single expense. Because the truth is no nonprofit has extraneous expenses. We spend money on things that are needed. So every single expense, and then you have to calculate or estimate your total units of service. So for a food bank, it was one person, one meal. For an animal shelter, it might be one animal, one day of care. For an arts organization, it might be one person, one performance, or one person, 1 hour of experience. It just kind of depends. So you want to try to break that down into the smallest unit that you can. It's usually one person, 1 hour, or one person, one experience, or something like that. And then you do math. You divide. So you look at those total units of service for the year, divide that into your total expenses, and then see what you get. If that number is less than about $10, you're golden, because that's going to be an easy thing for people to understand and give to. If it's higher, you want to look for any way to break it down further. So a lot of times when I explain this, I'll get somebody from an animal shelter and they'll say, well, it's $50 per animal for their whole stay. And I'm like, well, how long is the average length of stay? 21 days? Great. Then break it down. Divide that by 21. Let's see what you got. Sometimes it's a higher number, and that's just what it is, and that's okay. So I remember one time I was working with, I think it was a Boys and Girls Club, and their core number was like $150 per child for this experience. It was like, well, that's for like 3 months or a semester of school. Can you break that down further?
Very.
And I remember in one situation, there was not a way to break it down further. And we said, okay, then you just need to explain how life-changing that program is. And is it worth $150 to change a life?
Right.
And when you get into explaining why it is what it is, it's okay. People will give. I've done that many times with numbers that seemed kind of high. And it works as long as you can explain why it is what it is.
Right.
So you figure out the core number, and then you start using it in fundraising. And every organization that I've helped with this has had the same experience that I did, that connecting the dots in the donor's mind between their donation and the impact it will have, which is what a core number does, encourages higher giving.
Absolutely. And I think that's huge. International nonprofits sometimes have that challenge of, again, storytelling and understanding that impact and clearly communicating, because so many international donors haven't seen that cause in action, haven't experienced what a beneficiary is going through, or, whatever is going on. So when you can clearly communicate and really break down that level of impact, it really helps the donor really give or understand where their donation is actually going to create that impact or have an impact internationally. So Sandy, where do you often use, or where do you see the core number being used in fundraising? Is it appeals? Is it on your website? Tell us a little bit more about the where.
Everywhere. Everywhere. Now, for some organizations, you can calculate one core number for your whole organization. Like I was able to do that at the food bank, even though we had about 8 or 10 different programs. They were all about feeding people. So that was easy enough for me to figure that out organizational wide. For some organizations, you have to figure it out by program. And then if you're raising money for a specific program or a specific project, you can use a core number there. Now, I will say a core number is not meant for capital campaigns. That's a whole different ballgame of fundraising.
Sure.
But for anything you're doing that's related to annual operations, core number can work really well. I've used it very successfully in appeals. I've used it to recruit monthly donors. And that's worked really, really well, whether that was through the mail or at an event. That works really well. I've used it for Giving Tuesday. And one of the things that I love about international organizations is that a US dollar goes really far in another country. So I was helping an organization that was based in the US. They worked in India several years ago, and it was their first time to do Giving Tuesday. And so we figured out that for, I think it was $27.13, somebody could provide a month's worth of lunch to a student in their program. I mean, it was such a small number, and I know people went like, really, you can do that? But an American dollar goes really far. So we were able to use those kind of numbers for very specific things and just bang out. We completely funded several needs that organization had for the year.
Wow.
Because of using the core number and just showing how far that dollar was going to go in another country. We had some fantastic photography. I had been with them. I actually got to go to India with them. And we had a video team with us. So we were taking pictures and getting video, and it was great. That was in like September, I think. No, it was in January. And then that year for Giving Tuesday, we had like all these resources to use. So we had the core number, which was very attractive because when donors are giving, they're thinking about how they can have the most impact they can have with their money, especially if they perceive that they can't give a large amount of money. And the $25 or $27.13 that they give, they want it to have the most impact possible.
Right.
So an international organization can oftentimes have an advantage over a domestic organization because of that.
Yes.
Because their impact is so much more. So we had great core numbers, fabulous images, video and photography. And then we were able to tell stories that went right with it. And it just touched people's hearts, and they gave like crazy, and it was awesome.
That's incredible. And I actually want to touch on that too, because I was just in St. Louis with a international organization. And the director was like, Morgan, how do I get people within my community in St. Louis to really care about an international cause? You know, oftentimes they're like, why aren't you supporting people directly in St. Louis? And one of those main things that we talk about is your dollar goes a lot further and can create huge impact for those in need, you know? And there's organizations doing great things within the local areas, right? And there's still support needed internationally. So it's just using that core number and that storytelling to get them passionate about an international cause, because their money can go really, really far. And that impact can go far.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to remind people is that, number one, not everybody gives to charity. And we have to just let that go. We are not going to change their minds. And of the people who give, they have their favorite causes. So one person might be all about international hunger efforts, and they don't care about the Humane Society. And somebody else is all about their alma mater, and they don't care about the arts. And we have to get on board with that. So that's when being smart about who we're targeting to bring in new donors makes the most sense, because we are not going to change people's minds to give to a different cause if that doesn't warm their heart. So we just have to remember that when we get really clear about those people who are most likely to care about the cause, we understand how they think, we understand why the cause matters, then you can, let's say, structure your story, and you can strategize your ask in a way that is most resonating with them. And that's when you get more new donors, and that's when you see bigger donations. So we have to just ignore all those people who care about other things. That's fine. There's room for everybody to give, and there's room for people who just want to give to international and people who just want to give in St. Louis, and there's room for people who want to give to both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Sandy, that's a perfect segue into what I also wanted to talk about today was finding your ideal donor. And that's one of my, favorite things I've also learned with Sandy is exactly what you just said. You have to hone in on your specific donor, because if your messaging and your storytelling is too broad, it's, that specific donor isn't going to understand you're talking to them. So when we think about donor mapping and trying to find your ideal donor, so if we're thinking, kind of specifically international nonprofits, and again, you're going to kind of niche down even more to that. So it might be an education international nonprofit, or arts or animal, whatever it might be. But let's back up. What is donor mapping? And then how can a nonprofit benefit from doing an ideal donor or donor mapping exercise?
Mm-hmm. So in my world, we call it ideal donor profile. And what that is about is being very clear about who makes an ideal donor for your organization, and then describing them with demographics and psychographics. So demographics are facts. Do they live in a certain part of town? Do they have a certain occupation? Do they attend certain religious organizations? Like, what do you know about them? And this does not have to be real scientific. No, most of the time when I've done this myself or I've done it with others, like, we just take whatever you know right off the top of your head, and that's going to be good enough. Yes, you can do surveys and you can find out things, but you really don't need to. You just need enough information that you can build a profile. And then as you use it, you can tweak it some as you go. So, For example, when I worked at the food bank, I was at a conference of development directors from food banks, all across the country, and we had a consultant there, and he said, look, we've done the work. Here's your ideal donor. And I'm like, great, where's my pen? I'm going to write all this down. He said, it is female. And I'm thinking about the donors that I knew. I didn't even know a lot of my donors, but I'm thinking about the ones that I knew. I'm like, most of my donors are female. He said, they're 55 plus. And I'm like, that works too. So he just rattled off all these, like they're educated, they're active in the community, they're this, they're that, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just thinking about the 5 or 6 that I knew for sure, and they met every single criteria. And I said, great, that's really good to know. Then the question in my mind was, all right, if that's who I'm looking for, women, 55 plus, active in the community, attend religious services regularly, where can I find them easily and in large numbers?
Yes.
And the first thing that popped in my head was women's groups at churches. So that's how I went about it. It was not scientific. It was, okay, I've got this idea. Let me go try it. And I lined up a couple of speaking opportunities at women's groups at churches, and it was spot on. I'll never forget the first one I did was at a huge Methodist church close to downtown. And there were probably 50 people in the room, and it was all ladies. So I had a really, really good talk. This is key. So for anybody who wants to use this strategy, you have to have a good talk. It can't be boring. And that's a whole other topic. So I had a good talk, and I passed around a sheet that basically had a place for them to put their name and their address, phone number, email, all that sort of stuff. And at the end, I had a full sign-up sheet. Everybody had signed up to hear more about the organization. So I did not say, sign up to get our newsletter. I said, sign up to find out more about how you can get involved. That's key.
So key. Absolutely.
Nobody wants another newsletter, but sign up to find out how you can. So I had a full sign-up sheet. People were handing me money and checks like crazy, sticking $20 bills in my hand, and here's 10. And can you come and speak to my other such and such group? So I got invitations to go other places. And then a few days later, I got a thank you note from the group's treasurer along with another check. So I said, well, that worked. Let me do more of that. That's how simple this can be, is just thinking about what do your best donors have in common. And then you go look for places where you can find more people like that easily and in large numbers. So you're looking for gatherings of those people, whether it's a club or whether it's an online site or whether it's a Zoom meeting, whether it's a group that somebody else is gathering or a group that you can gather. This can work. And I have had clients, I have done this in person. I've had clients that have done Zoom events and recruited new donors really, really easily. And I just shook my head and went, that's awesome. I love it. They had a great program, and they basically had done a peer-to-peer where they had friends invite friends in, and they had 30 or 40 people in a Zoom and converted probably 90% of them into donors, which was great. Like, that's a very high conversion rate.
Yes. And I want listeners to hear, because, you know, the first thing is like, oh, well, maybe I don't have access to in-person things. Virtual. Everything is virtual these days. So hosting something online on Zoom, Facebook groups, don't discredit Facebook groups. So there's so many great groups of people within Facebook or other online communities. So there's absolutely outlets to do it online or virtually, not just in person.
Yeah, I've had groups who have done Facebook Live to do tours of their facility or tours of where they work. And you can promote that ahead of time and get people to join you in a Facebook Live where you can just say, here's what we're doing. And if you want to support this awesome work you see here behind me, here's how you give. That can work really well. So what I like about these techniques is they don't cost anything. All they cost is your time and you strategizing. So for those who are bootstrapping and trying to get it going, this does not have to cost a lot of money, and it doesn't have to be real hard. It can actually be pretty easy and very effective.
Yep, I absolutely agree. So make sure that there's no excuse to, finding the large groups, because there's access anywhere and it can be very cost effective. So you talked about, though, too, when you went and presented this and people just started handing you money, surely you had to do something right with your storytelling. So it wasn't you just going up there and say, give me money. I'm sure you use something around a core number, but then also what is effective storytelling? Are you using multiple stories? Are you honing in on one story? what kind of tips do you have for nonprofits to create a narrative that really connects emotionally with their audience? Especially, international nonprofits have to work a little bit harder with storytelling because they need to be a little bit more descriptive. So tell me kind of some tips of how, what is effective storytelling?
Yeah, great. So we could talk about this all afternoon. Let me see if I can give listeners a couple of good tips. So one thing that I sort of stumbled upon years ago, a technique that I have used many times, it works really well, is tapping into universal emotion. So there are certain emotions that we all feel. We all understand hope. We all understand fear. We all understand loneliness. Most of us understand despair. We understand joy. I mean, there's just a handful of emotions that most of us get those.
Well,
And so when I'm telling a story, whether it's verbally or in writing, I like to tap into that by using imagine language. So I might say, imagine you're a single mom. You have 2 kids. You're working 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, and your car breaks down, or one child needs new shoes. The money that you had planned to spend on groceries this afternoon just got allocated to something else. There's nothing in the house and you have no idea how you're going to feed your family. What do you do?
yeah,
So when you can do something like that, like the people who have any inclination at all toward that, they're going to get it.
Yeah.
They're going to get it. They're going to put themselves in those shoes. And now we're plucking heartstrings. Now we're helping them feel what your beneficiaries feel of your organization.
That's
or
powerful.
at least we're getting them to feel what we need them to feel to say, you can fix this for somebody else. You can change the game for this mom in Zambia who is struggling to put food on the table. You can change it for this child in Uganda, for this orphan in India. So the imagine language works really well. And then the story, I see so many more nonprofits getting this these days, but a lot of them still mess it up. Storytelling is not about what your nonprofit does. It's not about the programs. Well, we've been around since 1982. We have 6 programs in 3 countries, and we do this and we do that. No, that is not your story. The story is the why of what your organization does. It's why you exist. It's the problem you address. It's the people you impact. So the story is about, we're trying to make sure that no one has to walk 2 miles for fresh water ever again.
Right.
And then you can talk about how you're doing that. But that actually is one of the most powerful stories that I've heard. And I can't remember what organization was telling me that, but they were saying that the women were walking, like, I want to say 10 miles a day to get fresh water. And not only was that a hardship, but it was dangerous. It was very dangerous for them to be alone on a road walking to get water because of wildlife, yes, but because of uprising in their country or being attacked or whatever.
Right.
And to me, that was an easy way. Gosh, I hate to even say easy, but I think a lot of people could understand the fear that woman might feel and how dangerous that is and how that's so preventable by donating X amount for a rainwater catch system for their village that is going to protect all these different women.
Right.
So using stories about specific people that your organization helps is powerful. I know that some people say, well, we don't have specific stories we can tell, or our organization is new and we don't have any stories yet, or we have privacy issues. That's fine. You can tell the story of a typical person who gets help from your organization.
Absolutely.
We did that at the food bank all the time. We would talk about the average person who needs help from a food pantry is facing this, or a combination of all those things. So it was really easy to just describe their situation without saying it's Joanne or it's Roger or it's whomever. Like, as we've looked at the hundreds of people who need help every day in our community, here's what they have in common.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's so powerful. And it's being so descriptive. It's being intentional. People can really, like what you're saying, can start to understand if I was in that person's shoes, what would that feel like? What would that look like? which is really important for international nonprofits to, get their story across. So we've talked about, kind of ideal donor mapping. So where to find your new donors, how to get your core number, effective storytelling. And I feel like all of this combined can really be used to create an effective campaign, an online appeal. So whether that's an email, especially for international nonprofits, you're most likely using email. You can definitely, I think, use this for direct mail. But I feel like a lot of this can now be used into translating into writing an effective campaign or appeal.
Yes.
So I'd love to kind of know, Sandy is a genius when it comes to creating and having, kind of a guide, a blueprint, a roadmap to creating a effective email appeal. Can you kind of walk us through how we can kind of use those different strategies that you've just talked about into now writing that email?
Mm-hmm. So before I jump into that, let me just say this. I was not always good at this. This is a skill that I've developed over the years, and other people can do this too. So if anybody's like, oh gosh, this is hard to put an appeal together. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to ask. I don't know what to say. I get it. That was me at one point too. And the more you do it and the more you study it and the more you pay attention to what works, the better you're going to get. Right. So let me just start with that I was not always good at this. I've done it for 20 plus years at this point, almost 25 years. And I've gotten to the point where I just need a story and I need like one good stat and a core number, and I can write an appeal very, very quickly for somebody. So the way that I do it is I first get very clear about what am I asking for. So you don't want to start the letter until you're real clear about what you're asking for. Am I asking people to provide lunch for one student in our program? Are we trying to get one rainwater capture system for a village? What are we asking people to support? Then I need a story. What is the story that I'm going to tell? I always start the appeal with a story. Don't start with, thank you for all your past support, blah, blah, blah. We have to remember that people are incredibly busy. They have the attention span of a goldfish, and I'm not kidding. Look it up, and that's about 7 seconds. And what that means is we got to grab people's attention immediately. And if you start with thank you for your past support, people think it's a thank you letter, and they're done. They're moving on to the next thing. You have to start with something incredibly hooky, like Morgan needed water, but she knew the journey was life or death.
Wow.
Like, what? People are going to go, wait, what? And what that does, that first sentence is super short. It's going to fit on one line, and that gets them to read the next sentence. And then we can go to say something like, you see, people in XYZ village don't have easy access to water. They have to walk up to 15 miles just to get a gallon of clean water.
So right there, you're stating the problem. You're stating, what's needed. Yep.
And we're putting it in context of a person. And not only is it a long walk, but it's dangerous. And she knows the possibility exists that her kids might be orphans before she gets back.
Wow.
Now we're grabbing the heartstrings.
Absolutely.
So we're using basically one sentence paragraphs to tell a story. When we're doing this in email, we have to remember it's got to be super short because people don't read. Super duper short. One sentence paragraphs. I'm not kidding. If you send something that's got big paragraphs like this, people are not going to read it. Remember that over half of email is read on a phone. So I don't know about you, but my phone screen is like that. And anything longer than one sentence in a paragraph looks too hard. If it looks hard, I'm not going to read it.
Right. Absolutely.
So you tell the story and then you pivot to how the donor can help. So there's always some sentence like, but you can change this for Morgan and others just like her. Your gift of X, and that's where you use the core number. Your gift of, $27.13 will provide a rainwater catch system for not just Morgan, but her whole village, eliminating the need for that daily, dusty, dangerous walk.
Wow. There you go.
And then you go right to, here's how you give, hugs and kisses, and you sign off and put a PS on it.
PS. Right. I think that's so important, Sandy. Why a PS? Can you share a little bit more about why should there be a PS statement?
Because people don't read.
Yep.
They're going to read the first sentence or two, and then they're going to start scrolling. So you have to use the PS to recap the ask in a way like you can help women like Morgan and others avoid the dangerous walk of getting water, your gift of X will do Y, please give now.
Right. Right.
And the link. So your PS is super short. It just recaps the ask.
I think what's really important too is you focused on one story. I see oftentimes in appeals, there's this person and then there's that next person. And then, before you know it, your appeal is super long, but also you just lose interest in the reader, right? So the next email appeal can be a whole nother story. So it could be a series of stories, but keeping that email to one story that kind of represents your community is definitely better. And I think too, it is important is bolding, like highlighting certain phrases throughout the email because people do skim. So kind of tell us about bolding. When should people be bolding certain lines, sentences, paragraphs throughout their email appeal?
Yeah, either bolding or making the font bigger in certain ones. That also works. So what you want to think about, you're going to write this appeal and it's going to be beautiful. You're going to spend a lot of time on it. And then you have to remember that probably 95% of your audience is not going to read the whole thing. I know, right? Just work so hard on it. So you use bold and bigger font to hit the highlights. So if all they do is read those 3 or 4 bold sentences, they get the gist of it. So we're using bold very strategically to tell the story in highlights.
Yeah. That's great. I love it. Oh, this has been so incredible because we've just learned basically 4 really important key strategies in fundraising. With the core number, donor mapping, storytelling, and fundraising appeal. You're going to launch that appeal and the money's it's gonna start coming in, especially because you're talking to those people that you need to be talking to and that care about the cause. And it's not just anyone and everyone. You're going to actually start to see conversion happen. In regards to, some smaller nonprofits that have limited resources, what advice would you give to, I guess, small nonprofits, when it comes to starting with your core number and donor mapping and creating impactful appeals? Where do they start? Or just what advice do you have for smaller nonprofits?
Yeah, for really small organizations or people who are doing fundraising as part of their job and they wear a lot of other hats, one of the most important things that they can do is carve out time every week to work on fundraising. We have a tendency to deal with the burning fires, and taking care of your donors is probably never going to be a burning fire, but it's critical that you take care of donors and that you communicate with them when you're not asking. So that may mean saying, well, from 8 a.m. to noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to work on fundraising. I'm going to block that on my calendar. I'm not going to let anything else intrude on that. That's more important than it sounds like. That sounds like, oh, it's so simple. That's really important to make that appointment with yourself to work on that. And From there, you want to try to put a plan together, even if it's a very simple plan, so that you know when you're going to ask. Don't wait until you're desperate for money to start thinking about fundraising.
Yes.
It's too late. You want to think ahead and be proactive and think, okay, well, maybe I want to ask once a quarter. Good. That's a good place to start. So then you go get your calendar out and you mark those times that you want to ask. Now, in fourth quarter, October, November, December, you might want to ask 2 or 3 times. Totally fine. And your donors can handle that. Then you want to make sure that you have things that are happening in between the asks that are not asks, like a really good, heartwarming newsletter, or just an update video, a thank you video that you send out to your whole list. There's so many things you can do, and it's really just a matter of scheduling it and planning it out. And what's so important about this is that it's going to help you be proactive and not reactive. You're never going to do your best work when you're reactive. And number 2, if you are communicating with donors when you're not asking, it helps them feel valued. If all you do is show up with your hand out, gimme, 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 that feels so crappy to donors.
It does.
Giving, and they're going to go away.
Yep.
So blocking off time to work on this, getting a super simple calendar, an ask a quarter is a good place to start. And then just looking at what you're going to do when you're not asking. Then you always know what's coming next. Then you can look at that calendar and see what's happening in the next 60 days, the next 90 days. What do I need to be working on now so that ask goes out 6 weeks from now? That's going to help you keep your sanity and keep the funds rolling in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this conversation today because it's really, these are the foundations, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can build from there. But when you have these foundations, when you get and really understand who your donors are, when you get that messaging and storytelling right, when you get the core number right, you can build from there. So I would, if you're well into your nonprofit or your fundraising career and you don't have these foundations, go back to them. But if you're just now getting started, work on these foundations, because it's really going to help you propel and exceed for the future, and you can continuously build on that. And just kind of, last question to wrap it up, Sandy, these are the foundations that I think they can kind of really be used throughout upcoming years. But in your opinion, looking ahead, do you see any trends in nonprofit fundraising, and how should kind of organizations prepare for the future? Is it online? Are you seeing any new trends that are happening right
now? There's always some new shiny ball out there. Oh, here's a new social media platform. Oh, it's TikTok. Oh, it's this or it's that or the other.
Right.
I tend to not jump too much on trends. I like to stay with the tried and true.
That's great.
I like things that work. Like, for example, we talked about a quarterly ask. Once you get that in place, add monthly giving. Monthly giving is such a bread and butter piece of revenue for a nonprofit, and that brings you money every month. Work on major gifts. Like, work on the stuff that we know is going to work. It's never going to change. It's always going to work. A couple of things that I have seen, though, I've seen lots of sponsor programs that have worked really, really well. Sponsor a child in our program, sponsor a village. I've seen that work really well. That's not new. But I do see it as more of a trend. And I think if international organizations have not found a way to do more of that, that can work really well. I think using technology to bring people virtually to where you are is so powerful. So whether that's a video of your work in process, it's a live Zoom, a live Facebook Live, whatever that is, just helping people get the real life experience without actually being there can be super powerful.
Right.
But then also inviting some of your best donors to go with you.
Yes.
When you go to do your work on the ground can be powerful. I've been to multiple countries and have a couple of other invitations to go to some other places. And I love that. Even if I haven't been able to go, I love that I've been invited to go to Guatemala and Liberia and Kenya. I would love to do that. And I'm very flattered that those organizations would ask. And it makes me feel like part of the team that they've invited me to go. Yes. So I think that, that's another thing that you can do is just like take a couple of donors with you, because it will change their life and how they feel about your organization. Like, they will be donors forever at that point.
Donors forever and ambassadors forever, right? They're going to go back to their community, back home to the States, and spread the word. And, they're able to understand it firsthand. And that's how, you have a great ambassador on your hands too. So, well, Sandy, just thank you so much for sharing all these golden nuggets. I mean, go back and re-listen to kind of like, I guess, each excerpt and really learn, how to build out your core number, how to find your ideal donor, storytelling, appeal writing. And there's tons of resources on Get Fully Funded's website. Sandy just has an incredible wealth of knowledge. So head to her website for a lot more resources and tools. And I know there's some core number exercises on her website too. But Sandy, I have to ask, just parting last question. If you could go anywhere in the world right now, where would you land?
There's so many places I would go. There's so many things I want to see. But for some reason, I want to go hiking in Ireland. That is probably going to be my next international trip.
Oh, how cool. It's beautiful there. My sister-in-law, the pictures that she always shows, it's outstanding. So, well, Sandy, is there any last parting words or knowledge that you want to share with the crowd?
Well, I just want to tell everybody who's listening, grab one idea that you've learned today and take action on it, because that's how you're going to get the most out of the time you spent with us today.
Yep, absolutely. No, thank you for that. And thank you so much, Sandy, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.